What's up, everybody? I'm Finn McKenty. This is the Punk Rock MBA, and today we are here to talk about the one and only Rob Zombie, one of the most iconic figures in the last 30 years of rock and metal. In the 90s alternative metal scene where he came from was really interesting in that there's several of these like Renaissance men who started out as musicians but then also did art or writing or some other kind of parallel creative career. Glenn Danzig and Henry Rollins, for example. But I think out of all the people who tried it, nobody pulled it off better than Rob Zombie did. As far as music goes, both White Zombie and his solo albums are classics that I think still hold up very well today. His artwork is strong enough that I think he could have easily had a legitimate career as just an artist. And he's also a legit filmmaker slash director and screenwriter who's directed movies in legendary franchises like Halloween and The Munsters. So how did he do it? How did he go from being the weird art kid who grew up in a small town in Massachusetts to selling over 15 million albums and getting the keys to some of these huge Hollywood franchises? Those are the questions that I will answer in this video. But first, if you haven't, please check me out on Twitch. I'm streaming twice a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 4 to 7 p.m. Pacific. And there's a link to that in the description of this video. But first, I want to thank DraftKings for sponsoring this video. It's officially the time of year that we have all been waiting for, NFL season. Let's be real, it is the king of all sports. And what better way to kick things off than with an exciting deal from DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. New customers, all you have to do is bet $5 on any NFL wager, and you will instantly receive $200 in free bets. That's right, DraftKings is giving all new customers $200 in free bets when they place any wager of $5 or more on the football team of their choice. Plus, with same game parlays, you can combine multiple bets from the same game to give yourself a shot at even bigger winnings all season long. And DraftKings has been around for quite a while now, so you know that your funds are safe and you can withdraw them whenever, wherever you want. So if you want to check this out, download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. New customers use the promo code PUNKROCK and receive $200 in free bets instantly when you place a $5 wager. That's promo code PUNKROCK only at DraftKings Sportsbook at the link in the description of this video. Rob Zombie was born in 1965 to parents who actually worked as carnies, like carnival people, before they eventually settled down in the city of Haverhill, Massachusetts. And from the sound of it, he actually had a very normal childhood. He did well in school, he didn't get into any trouble, and he and his brother mostly spent their free time soaking up 1970s pop culture, especially comics, horror, and sci-fi movies. And as he got a bit older, that's where music came into play. They got into a lot of those theatrical, over-the-top 70s rock bands like Kiss and Alice Cooper. And from a very early age, he knew that what he wanted to do with his life was the combination of all those things. He said that he wanted to be Alice Cooper, Steven Spielberg, and Stan Lee. And so after graduating from high school, he moved to New York City to go to art school at Pratt and then Parsons, which are two of the most prestigious art and design schools in the whole world. So the fact that he was even able to get into them says a lot about how talented he was. And he actually didn't graduate from either school, but while he was in New York, he did manage to find a foothold into the creative world. First as a production show on the cult classic TV show Pee-wee's Playhouse, and then as a designer for the adult magazine Celebrity Sleuth. And maybe most importantly of all, while he was at Parsons, he met Sean Yseult and started White Zombie with her in 1985. They named the band after an obscure horror movie from 1932 starring Bela Lugosi. And although most people now would think of White Zombie as like an industrial alternative metal band, they actually started as more of like a noisy art rock band that put out 2 EPs and 1 album called Soul Crusher, none of which really got much attention outside their local scene and circle of friends. They really started to become the White Zombie that we know today in 1989 on their second album called Make Them Die Slowly, which again was named after a cult classic horror movie. And they'd recently gotten Ivan DePrume on drums, who was a big fan of the thrash metal scene at the time. He got Rob into Slayer and Metallica, and that is when the band started to become more metal. Although, unfortunately, as you can tell, the production on that album is pretty terrible. It was really hard to find back in the day. I remember finally tracking down a copy of it and being super excited to put it on because I was a huge fan of the band, and being just totally disappointed because it sounded so terrible that it was honestly like almost unlistenable. And the band seems to agree with me on that. Sean E. Salt said, "I can tell you that we hated it and I never listened to it due to the tinny production. But still, you could tell that they were headed in the right direction, and it was the addition of their guitarist Jay Unger that really made the band come together." On their next EP, God of Thunder. The production on this EP is still pretty rough, but you can still hear the potential there. You can hear that this is when White Zombie finally became White Zombie. It had the sort of thrashy riffs, coupled with the grooves and the samples and Rob's art direction. It was rough around the edges, but it was there. And it caught the attention of Geffen, who signed them and released the album that would change their lives forever, La Sexorcisto, in 1992. And like most people, this is when I discovered White Zombie. I think I saw the video for Welcome to Planet Motherfucker on Headbangers Ball, got the album, and loved it. It was heavy, but still really groovy and catchy. But what really made me fall in love with the band was actually the visuals. Back then, I spent almost all my free time drawing, and I was really into stuff like Ratfink and underground comics at the time, as well as bands like The Accused, who were using a lot of that imagery. And I was just immediately blown away and in love with the artwork on the album packaging, especially when I found out that Rob Zombie himself actually did it. This is an album where it's definitely worth tracking down a physical copy of it, because every piece of this album packaging feels like it has Rob's touch on it. And it was the perfect visual match to the music. This is an album where you really want to sit down and listen to this on headphones and look at the artwork as you're listening to it. And to this day, I still think that this album is a masterpiece of what I guess I would call psychedelic metal, and I've never heard anything else like it. However, as of 1992 at least, I was apparently in the minority. The album had been out for over a year, but it was basically flopping until MTV's insanely popular show Beavis and Butthead picked it up.
The key moment was Beavis and Butthead. Our band had signed to Geffen Records. We had a single out, but it was really hard to break through because we were pretty weird for what was typically on MTV at that time. But then Beavis and Butthead broke, and they played one of our videos, and overnight it changed everything. I mean, we went from like selling, 500 records a week to 30,000 records a week. You went from being, playing tiny clubs to arenas.
And with the support of Beavis and Butthead, that was that. Almost overnight, they became one of the biggest newer bands in metal. They toured for over 2 years to support La Sexorcisto, and then in 1995 released Astro Creep 2000, which brought in a lot more industrial elements to their sound. And this album was an even bigger hit for them, eventually going double platinum, again thanks to Beavis and Butthead and just generally strong support from MTV overall. Rob also won an MTV Video Music Award for the video he directed for their song More Human Than Human, which was the beginning of him getting established as a filmmaker. And they continued to tour relentlessly, going out with bands from Pantera to Prong to Pennywise, Metallica, Danzig, and dozens more. The band's profile kept growing and growing and growing, but after releasing an EP of remixes in 1996, the band abruptly broke up in 1998. And as far as I can tell, nobody has really officially said why they broke up, But it sounds to me like they just kind of grew apart, since Rob Zombie apparently hasn't spoken to anybody in the band since last time they played together. Rob announced that he had started working on his solo album in 1997, before the band was officially broken up, but it doesn't sound like that was the reason for their breakup, again, according to Sean. Rob's decision to go solo has nothing to do with the cost of fame being too great. We decided to break up before he decided to go out on his own. But either way, his first solo album, Hellbilly Deluxe, came out in 1998, and it pretty much picked up where White Zombie left off stylistically. And the album's first single was Dragula, which was named after Grandpa Munster's car from the TV show The Munsters. And on the back of that single, this album was immediately a hit. The album debuted at number 5 on Billboard. It went platinum a little more than a year after its release, and had another huge follow-up single with Living Dead Girl. And again, this album had the same beautiful artwork full of all those cool little details that we'd come to expect from him. For example, he actually had a 10-foot replica made of the robot from a movie called Phantom Creeps, which he used in the album art and then later in his stage show. And as somebody who always liked the visual side of Rob Zombie's work as much as the music itself, that's the kind of thing that I always really appreciated. I almost think of Rob Zombie or White Zombie as like a multimedia project where he's the creative director and the music is just one part of that project. And this is where all those lofty, crazy dreams he had as a kid started to actually come to life. He said, "I always knew, even as a kid, that I wanted to be part of everything that I was a fan of. I couldn't be satisfied by just standing on the sidelines watching. I wanted to become friends with all the people I loved and admired." And as crazy and ambitious as that must have sounded coming out of the mouth of a teenager, it was actually coming true. For example, he got legendary comic artists like Gene Colan, who had done groundbreaking, iconic work for comics like Daredevil and Howard the Duck, among many others, to do artwork for The Booklet. He also did a song with Alice Cooper for The X-Files, and even Hollywood had started to come calling. The producers of the iconic 90s movie The Crow saw the video that he had directed for White Zombie's I'm Your Boogeyman, and based on that, asked him to write the script for the next movie in the Crow series. And the movie was actually never released, but still the experience showed him and the industry that he could have a place as a high-level filmmaker. But he didn't let his foot off the gas as a musician either. Rob Zombie's second solo album, The Sinister Urge, came out in 2001, named after a film by the iconic/infamous director Ed Wood, who Johnny Depp would go on to play in a film by the same name, and it hit number 8 on Billboard. And it included features by people like Kerry King from Slayer and Ozzy Osbourne, again fulfilling that childhood dream he had of working with the people who inspired him. But to me, maybe the biggest turning point in his career that in my opinion really defines Rob Zombie as this multimedia creator/visionary came when he made his feature film directorial debut with House of a Thousand Corpses.
From director Rob Zombie comes a journey into hell.
He was working on creating a haunted house attraction at Universal Studios, and I guess they saw something that led them to believe he would have potential because, as he says, I was in the office of the head of production or something, and he asked me if I had any movie ideas, and I pitched him Corpses, which was very rough at the time because I wasn't ready, and I made it up on the spot. And he may have pulled it out of his ass, but apparently his pitch was good enough because they said yes, and a few months later, they were in production on his first feature-length film. And what's interesting is that the movie almost never came out. Even though Rob was clear from the beginning that he was not making anything remotely mainstream, the initial cut of the movie was so intense that it got an NC-17 rating, which would have made it completely unmarketable in any kind of mainstream way. And so Universal got gun-shy, shelved the movie, and it seemed like that was the end. But Rob was unwilling to admit defeat, so he bought the rights to the movie from them and eventually sold it to Lionsgate, who released it in 2003. agree. House of a Thousand Corpses was clearly an homage to sleazy, low-budget 70s horror movies that you might see at some drive-in movie theater, in particular Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Just like that movie, it was about a group of kids who stumble upon this crazy backwoods family that ends up killing them, and even includes some of the same cast members, for example, Bill Moseley, who also played Chop Shop in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. And it actually got pretty negative reviews upon release because, as far as being any sort of traditional movie, it was pretty flawed. Even Rob Zombie says so. It's just a calamitous mess. Well, when it came out, it seemed like everyone hated it. Now everyone acts like it's beloved in some way. All I see is flaw upon flaw upon flaw upon flaw. And I see his point, but personally, I really liked it, probably because I didn't go into it expecting it to have any sort of like great plot. To me, what I was looking for is for it to be basically like an extended length White Zombie video. I didn't really care about the plot or structure or dialogue necessarily. I just wanted it to be a visually compelling collection of these references to vintage horror movies, and that's pretty much what it was. As one review put it, I think it's better if you think of it as an experience more so than a movie. And as he said, it did eventually become somewhat of a cult classic, and it actually did pretty well at the box office, and it was at least received well enough that it was the start of his second career in movies and TV. His next big project was the sequel called The Devil's Rejects, which was set in the same universe, but had a much more realistic, less goofy, campy kind of tone. The Devil's Rejects got much better reviews than House of a Thousand Corpses, although I personally thought it was less visually compelling, and it also was much more dark and gory to the point where it made me and a lot of other people a little bit uncomfortable. And these two movies may not have been smash hits, but they did well enough that on the back of those two movies, he was given the chance to direct the next two installments of the legendary Halloween franchise, easily one of the most important series in all of horror films.
Only a river of blood can bring us together again.
And honestly, I don't think I'm enough of a horror fan to have a particularly strong or well-informed opinion on his remakes of these movies, but I do know that among horror fans, they're generally disliked for taking a more violent slasher kind of direction on the franchise, as opposed to the more suspense-oriented originals. But still, the fact of the matter is, he did it. He made two movies in the Halloween franchise. So for me, someone who had been following his career for 15 years at this point, I thought it was incredibly cool to see him come so far and have this much success as a director. Like to go from seeing White Zombie play with Prong and Danzig back in the early 90s to now read articles about him directing one of the most iconic franchises in the history of horror. How cool is that? He even went on to direct an episode of CSI Miami. Never thought you would see that. CSI directed by Rob Zombie. And later this year, his version of The Munsters is coming to Netflix as a feature film as well.
Munster Go Home. I got a lot of Munster stuff. That's a big thing that I like.
And then there's also his third career as an artist and comic book writer / creator. In addition to all the artwork that he's personally done for White Zombie and Rob Zombie albums and merch, he's also done quite a few projects in comics as a writer. For example, The Nail for Dark Horse Comics and Bigfoot with the legendary artist Richard Corbin. He also created a series of comics called Rob Zombie's Spook Show International, which ran for 9 issues and featured stories written by Rob and drawn by artists who've worked on huge titles like Avengers, Captain America, and Spider-Man, as well as a pinball machine and 8-track tapes and probably tons of other little projects that I'm not even aware of. And I could keep going. Like I said, this is just the tip of the iceberg. This guy is one of the most prolific creators you are going to find in any genre. And what's really amazing is that if you think back to what he said as a child, that he wanted to be Alice Cooper, Steven Spielberg, and Stan Lee, it was a crazy, unrealistic goal. but he actually kind of did it. And to me, that is just incredibly inspiring. It's hard enough to be good or successful at even one thing. So the fact that he's been able to have success in 3 different facets of creativity, each of which is incredibly competitive and difficult on its own, is a testament to what happens if you just keep grinding and simply refuse to accept defeat. So if you are trying to reinvent yourself, or if the world is trying to pigeonhole you as just one thing, remember that and ask yourself, what would Rob Zombie do? All right, my friends, that does it for this video. As always, let me know what you think in the comments. Also, I want to thank everyone who supports me on Patreon, especially those of you who support at the True Cult level or above. Patrons get all my podcasts early. I do giveaways. There's also a way to have me review your music or artwork or anything else that you would like my eyes and ears on. Every month, I do a call for submissions. If you want me to review something, all you got to do is drop it in the comments of that post. Then I will review it live on Twitch and post it for everyone to see. So if that sounds cool, hit the link in the description of this video. And with that, I'm going to sign off for now, but I will see you next time.